Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to question and answer session. I don't even know which one we're on. I think part 2 for House of the Intellect. Is that right, Jeremy?
Right, Wes.
Okay, great. And thanks, Jeremy, for being here. And thanks for all the questions. Oh, my gosh. What great, interesting, sometimes almost heartbreaking questions and comments have been coming in. So we'll try to burn through those as quickly as we can. But thanks again to everybody. This is it's been great.
All right, question number 1 from Scale Wing. It says, "Hi, Wes and Jeremy. I have a question for Wes. In a modern version of the Republic, Glaucon would ask Socrates, who watches the algorithms? And Socrates would reply, the algorithms watch themselves. I'm curious to know if you think that the monopoly of our tastes is incidental or purposeful and philosophically driven. Do social media companies simply program algorithms to grab our attention solely for the purpose of profit? Or is there an ethics driving the way that these algorithms are put into the world, that ethic being that humans are best having their views and tastes dictated to them and are so enthralled by the flickerings of the shadows on the wall that only a select few could ever possess the intellect and fortitude to develop their own tastes and interests?"
Well, I mean, that is it's a great question. And clearly the algorithms are being driven. And profit motive is too narrow of a goal, but not for your improvement, that's for sure, or mine or anybody else's, for whatever the purposes of the algorithmic designers, which are in no way aligned with your health, vitality, interests, enrichment, right? Sometimes this is simply profit motive, but there's a lot of other motives that they have as well. Growing a market, having influence, changing, there's all kinds of things that they can be doing. But yeah, essentially, yes, it's being driven by the profit motive. If there is an ethos here, and I think it's a great question, by the way, one I hadn't thought of before, is there an ethos behind this? And I pondered this, and I think the ethos is you don't matter. So I think the people who are driving this at the highest level really, really view the rest of the citizens of the world as cattle. And so they're very indifferent. And one of the things that came up in hearings in Europe, Europe and Australia, for instance, has done some limiting of social media for young people. And it turns out that most of the social media execs that were brought before various parliamentary commissions and so on do not allow their children to use social media. And so really it is this kind of, we know what we're doing. We know that it's not good. We don't want our children to participate in this, but your children, hey, we absolutely want them to participate. And so I don't know if they have an ethos that is good for anybody. I think they have an ethos that is good for them and that most people just don't matter. This seems to me, because I never get a sense once the original founders of these companies go away, all of a sudden, when they're bought by one of the big multinationals or something, you see this dramatic shift. And what you feel sometimes is like Instagram is a great example, where they really did seem to want people to see pictures of their friends and they wanted them to enjoy using it. And it's like, hey, that's great, sharing. And it was popular and they're making money and everything's going. And then when it gets sold to, I believe that was Meta that bought Instagram, very rapidly that went away. They clearly did not care about any of this for you. And so those dynamics, I think, are at play almost continuously and will only be accelerated by the presence of AI, I'm sure.
Jack has a question that is similarly connected to the algorithm. He's saying that when you were talking about community theater and the disappearance of community theater, he says the criticism is generally that it accuses community theater of arrogance. The local director is self-important or indulgent, and that criticism is because we now have access to so many types of art, whereas in the old days there might be 10 places you could find some art in your community, and now there's 100 million places because of the internet. And he's saying, is that just the other side of the coin of connecting with more people? Is it necessarily bad that there's this sort of criticism of local theater, because there is some kind of arrogance to that naturally, of, you know, you have access to all the movies and all the theater, and you and 10 other people are just trying to compete with something that's on a global scale. There is something naturally kind of arrogant, like, yeah, let's just go do what we want to do. And is that just the other side of the coin of deciding as a culture to plug into a larger, you know, to more people?
Yeah, one, I think the critique, I mean, one of the critique in culture generally, with all the movies and shows and stuff that make fun of local theater, do make fun of the arrogance. They make fun of people in every way. And I'm sure it's, you know, some of this is true-ish, but also like as if Hollywood doesn't have arrogance. I think a notoriously humble group of people, Hollywood, of course, always very shy and self-effacing. I think that's what Hollywood is noted for. So it's not really, it's what it is that it's our general audience, general television, movies do not explore the possibility and the potential greatness of local theater. What it does is it spends a lot of time denigrating it and mocking anybody who participates in it. That's a very important element that you see in popular media anytime this comes up. And the difference is what local theater provides. It cannot be duplicated online. It's local, right? It's the live. Why do people go to live music? They have everything online. Why do people go to live symphony orchestras? Like you can, you know, stream the entire collection of the history of the world, basically. Why do any of this? And the answer is, which the answer has been for several hundred years, if not thousands of years, that live theater is something that can only be experienced live, right? I mean, it's sort of there. Theater is an unstreamable. If you've ever seen a stream of a play, they're just painful because it's just all, you know, that's not what it's there for. I think the critique I would make is what we have is we have a media culture and a social environment that tells us local isn't important. And this is what I think is an interesting example is if you look at the history of jazz or the history even of rock and roll when it came out, which wasn't completely unrelated, of course, local bands used to open for touring bands. And they were always battle of the bands because everybody came out to root for their local band because they thought our boys are better than their boys, primarily boys, of course. And so people would show up not just for the concert, but they wanted to see the people they knew kick the ass of the people who were coming on. So the big touring jazz bands would be up against these local jazz bands, and jazz clubs, even in the major cities, would have this. Oh, this is our neighborhood. You're in our club, right? And they have, you know, so even if it was either implicit but also quite explicit, but part of this was people thought their local bands were the best. And so you had to come in from outside and prove that you were better. And then that's how you gained a reputation. What we've done is we've reversed that. If you are going to be successful, that means that you went someplace else, were successful, and then you come back. And now it's like, oh, I was successful. It doesn't matter where you are. You always have to go someplace else. We only believe in ourselves when we're beamed back to ourselves from some other place. So you don't want to be narrow and restrained. You know, it is great to have more cultural access, but I think this trick has been played on us that tells us like, oh, having more access is a replacement for something. And then what people really crave, obviously, is in-person community. That consistently attacked, mocked, made fun of, undercut, denigrated, just at every level, right? We just don't believe in it culturally. I mean, people do, they still support it. But it's such, to me, a fascinating cultural undercurrent to say, like, yeah, if you go to a local play, but you can fly to New York and go to Broadway, that's fine. You can go to London and go to a play in London, but I assure you that most reasonable sized communities have community theaters that often do really phenomenally, shockingly good things because you can only do them. There's a lot of things that need to be small. There was a Broadway play. I'm probably going on too long here, but I do feel, everybody can probably tell I feel strongly about this. Called Vietnam. But anyway, during the play, they put a helicopter on stage. Right, they lowered a helicopter on stage in New York and made the helicopter noise and everything. And everyone was like, "Wow, that's amazing!" And I'm like, "No, wow, that's so stupid." Like that theater, in theater, you don't need a helicopter on stage, right? This is a dumb prop, right? Like, don't do that. That's just dumb, because you can have that visceral impact with just the noise of a rotor blade, and the audience will be there with you. This is the magic of local, enveloped theater. And so, yeah, I do think the trick is to try and convince us that the local is not good. Somehow it's better to watch a bad show stream on your laptop than it is to go watch something at a local theater.
And Jack is really interested in this idea of we're now plugged into exponentially more options for art or for business or for whatever you're doing, and we're trying to keep our humanity. And so there's these metrics like likes and clicks, and it's hard to keep your humanity within that, trying to chase these clicks and likes. And he says, but I still wonder, when you put this many people together, how exactly is everyone supposed to interact in such a way as to keep their humanity? Even if you don't optimize for engagement, you still have to decide what people are exposed to and what people see from one another. I guess what I'm saying is, what if the alienation we're talking about is an inseparable bad side of the coin from being directly plugged into all humanity?
Yeah, no, this is absolutely. I mean, part of it is if fragmentation occurs, because you have so much more opportunity for people to do so much greater variety of things, which on one hand is great. But on the other hand, when I went to graduate school, the school I went to in a university had one of the finest libraries in the world. Well, it was a whole series of libraries on campus. And one reason you wanted to go to a research institution is because they had, I think there were like 7 million volumes on campus. It was, if the book existed, they probably had it. It was this, but there are only a few places in the world where that was true. And so you're like, oh, so it's great to be there. But notice this puts up a lot of walls around this kind of knowledge and this kind of research. And so, fast forward today, those barriers not entirely gone, but they've been lowered significantly. And so on the one hand, access is great, but cultural fragmentation, of course, is going to be felt much more powerfully because of that. However, I do think the primary product of the alienation is that we've been convinced that, not that it's not great to hear music online, not that it's got great but that somehow if we just keep going further that direction, I think we've learned that if you go too far this direction, if you get too much of your input this way, if you become too isolated, then that alienation just becomes massive, right? And that humans functionally need community, right, at some level. Hence the whole, House of the Intellect thing that Barzan was talking about, and the community emphasis on this. So yeah, I think it is a not unlikely outcome, and part of this may just be part of it's new, that the outcome is because it's so new, we just didn't know what the hell to do with it. And now we're kind of going, oh, you know what? Like, some shit just sucks when it's digital. We should do it. Yeah, let's do it in person. Let's do more in person. But it doesn't say there's great stuff too, but let's do, hang out in the coffee shop.
Right. So maybe it's not bad that we have access to so many more pieces of art, but this attitude, this nihilistic attitude of making fun of the community theater, maybe it's like, let's take it down a notch and not be so like that. If we could just have representations in movies where the community theater people are just regular people, maybe that would be a signal that we're balancing this a little better. Is that right?
Yeah, so at least culturally we could do that. I wouldn't hold my breath on that, but it's it's and part of it is, now that I'm in France, it's very interesting because French communities invest a lot in communities. Like, the French communities believe in themselves. We just had the equivalent of French 4th of July this summer, which is not the 4th of July, of course. And our local big fireworks display, yay, Bastille Day, yay. And the mayor came out and gave a speech. 98% nothing about France. 98% how great it is to be in Terrason. It was like a Terrasonian, like this city that small French city. And I asked, and everybody's like, yeah, of course that's what they do. What do they do in America? And I'm like, oh, they don't do this, right? Like it's all America. In France, apparently, they really, I mean, all the evidence is they really invest in and they believe much more strongly in the local. It's an interesting dynamic. So yeah, but it is a strong cultural impulse to like mock the local, mock the small, mock the regional. That if you're not a good band if you don't sell 20 million albums. It's just, which is a silly thing. What, you know, you got people that like you and you play in the local club. Like, isn't that great? Right.
And I'm going to stick with Jack here. He has another question on another episode. He's talking about technology and the reduction of our humanity. He says, what do I do about this? I think I reacted strongly before because the essential question is, as an individual, what do I do? I've been grappling with this for the past half a decade, and the answer I've come up with for myself is to create my own business where I can make systems that align with my own values and make the compromises that I think sustain everyone's humanity. But surely the answer for everyone can't be run away and make your own kingdom. There must be some larger answer for people in the middle of the hierarchies to make their own organizations and to figure this out to be more human. So this one's a kind of a prescriptive question for you.
Yeah, and I think partly it is the hello Socrates, the unexamined life, right? So this is the problem. Once you start examining your life, you run into these really vexing problems. It's so much better to just get drunk and ignore all this stuff. Or not. I guess I have to professionally say that's the wrong answer. No, but I do feel this at times. Yeah, this is a real question. Like, how do you respond to your world? But this is it's certainly one of the most significant philosophical questions: is how do I balance currently in our time? How do I balance all this technology and the influence it has on my life? People go full Luddite. Some people switch over to flip phones. They say, hey, there's too much stuff on the phone. I'm just not going to do that. I have I don't have any screens besides my computer, which I only use for, things like this. And, very limited. I try to limit my screen time a lot. I read books. I write by hand on paper. I have a pen that I dip in an inkwell, that kind of thing. And I've talked to other writers who say, oh, I've tried that, and oh my God, what a difference it makes. And so one way, I guess, would be a credit to you, because you're experimenting and you're trying to say, hey, I've got this problem. How do I address this? And what works for me probably isn't going to work for everybody, right? And that notion of going, but it is the trying of the saying, hey, I want to try to make this align more with my values. And I would say, if you can identify your values, it makes it much easier, because then you can hold it up and go, oh, this is okay. Or, no, this is not that helpful. So I would say, if you can identify your values and create a yardstick to hold up, that is super helpful. And then you can adjust according to what's valuable to you, what you think is important, what you think is liberating and life enriching.
So each person kind of needs to look at this on their own. There's not a subscription you can just sign up for and say, hey, I'm going to opt out and do it the kind of half Luddite way. Because not everyone can create their own business because they don't have the resources, but there's not some prescriptive broader way to do it. Sign up for this and you're out of the system.
Yeah, and like I said, I talk about France, of course, because it's topical in my life. But the flip side is, I talk to people in France, they're like, oh, I want to go to America, right? Because that's where you can go work, you can make as much money as you want, like, wow, they have all this. Now, how true that is, we'll just put that to a side. But it is this notion of, a lot of people do immigrate out of, not a lot, but people do immigrate out of France. And so what's a right answer for someone is going to be highly variable. Yeah.
There were a lot of questions about cinema and particularly about criticism. Critics seem to be criticized in our American culture and there's this kind of anti-intellectual thread that if you're criticizing and you're not just sitting there and watching the movie and then going to bed afterward, that you're somehow a hoity-toity, cultured, you're thinking of yourself as a cultured person and kind of like the other. So Jeremy asked a question about the Scorsese kind of cultural event where he criticized the Marvel movies. He says Scorsese commented on the Marvel movies, saying they were not cinema; they were more like theme parks, fun but not revelatory. And Jeremy says that one time he was criticizing some of his friends who were great artists, but they ended up just kind of going into non-art jobs, like maybe they just kind of helped out designing video games or things that weren't kind of fine art. And his friend heard him and said, "Hey man, just let people like what they like." And that sentence was like an immune response to his perspective and completely shut down the conversation. So the question from Jeremy is this extreme sensitivity to mild criticism a new form of anti-intellectualism?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a new form. That's an easy answer to it, but it is, again, a good question here. So how do we distinguish this? The fact that we can't even clarify these ideas anymore in our society lets you know how far anti-intellectualism is an absolute knee-jerk response to anything that comes along. I mean, we are so powerfully anti-intellectual in the United States that it's like people will say, like, oh, just let people like what they like, and it's like, okay, that's fine. It's like, but have they tried X? Like you say, people will say, "Oh, I don't like opera. Have you ever been to the opera?" And they're like, "No." And I'm like, "So what does that mean?" Like, I don't know a lot about art, but I know what I like. And I'm like, "No, you don't, because if you don't know a lot about art, if you fucking don't know what you like, it's a definition. This is just a definitional notion, right? Like, it's you can't know what you like if you haven't seen a lot of art. It's just." How would you know, right? It's just crazy. What a silly thing to say. But you get this constant versions of this, as if to say, "Hey, you like the Marvel movies? Why?" is somehow abusive, right? Like this is an assault on someone. They're like, "Hey, man, I just want to relax and watch a movie." I'm like, "Great, I didn't, But could we think about maybe why they're so popular? Well, they're good. Why, So any sense like Scorsese, where you try to step back and say, "Hey, it's fine that people like them." There's a term in German. Oh gosh, what's called Geldbeggar, which is like a dredge. It's a dredger. And there was a review of a Marvel movie in Die Neue Deutsche Zeitung many years ago that I read that I thought was perfect, and I thought it encapsulated the cultural difference. Because the argument of this criticism of one of the Marvel movies, I think the first Avengers movie, started with look, I know this was just a movie made to dredge gold, to make as much money as possible. He said, and the content of the movie is absolutely stupid and not even worth talking about, so we're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
However, it is a technical tour de force. So go see the movie, not for its content, because it's ridiculously stupid, like you didn't have a moment for it, but because the brilliance with which it is edited and shot, and then he went through and explored all the technical aspects of making of a movie like this, but all within this caveat of like, look, they're just trying to make as much money as possible, so they don't fucking worry about that. So even making that distinction is like, well, of course they're trying to make money. Like this is our knee jerk. Well, that's what everybody's trying to do. And it's like, no, that's not true at all. Like lots of movies are made. They know they're not going to make a lot of money. Right? They're not confused. When you make a documentary about, think of some strange, fun documentary like Buena Vista Social Club, which actually did shockingly well, was kind of a surprise hit back in the day, many decades ago. Wenders was not thinking he's making the most profitable movie ever. This was not one of his things. He owed a favor to someone. And so he said, okay, Ry Cooder. I think he owed a favor to Ry Cooder. And so he said, okay, I'll film this for you. Right. So this sort of a friend thing, if I remember correctly. It wasn't a profitability thing. But yeah, our notion that if you try to act, and the sensitivity makes it impossible, which I think is part of the frustrating thing that I've run into many times, is I'm not criticizing, I'm asking an actual valid question, a question I'm actually interested in. Like, hey, you really love these. If you really want to have this response, the most common I've had it was, I actually stopped doing it, is the Star Wars movies. Because I saw the first 2.5, And then they made the other ones, which I've tried to watch because everyone's they're just horrible. And then I say, like, hey, like, aren't they really bad? And you get this double, like, well, I mean, everybody knows they're no good, but it's Star Wars. I'm like, well, then why do you think they're good if you can also say that they're no good? And then they're like, it's Star Wars. And then I'm like, yeah, but they just seem really insipid and stupid at some level. And they're like, well, if you're just going to be like that and not enjoy them, and I'm like, well, why would I enjoy them? What is it?
Yeah.
And so we have become, as a society, basically illiterate. Or ill-filmate, I don't know what you would call that. The inability to actually, in 1984, Orwell talks about this. He also talks about this in other places, where he says, look, there's also Fahrenheit 451. People often misunderstand that book. It's not that people don't read, or it's not that people can't talk about ideas. It's that people are trained or learn through cultural reinforcement to not even want to do that. Right. So in Fahrenheit 451 or 454, how many degrees is it? No, I can't remember all of a sudden. 451, is it? Oh gosh, all of a sudden numbers. But the point of the book, or one of the points of the book, is that almost everybody in society has stopped reading. They don't even want to read. They don't even know why you would read. Like, reading has become just weird. And so it's not that they're censoring books, because people just don't even, that it's gone, right? As a concept, it's gone. And so they don't have to do that much censoring anymore.
Right.
So this is part of the underlying theme there. Orwell is the same thing. When you can't even talk about why you like something, I mean, that's problematic.
Right. Yeah, Scale Wing has a similar question. She says, "Hi, Jeremy and Wes. Are people mocked for film analysis? So mocked for trying to review films. There are many YouTube review channels with millions of subscribers and ardent fan bases. I do think that this consumption of a film reviewer is still largely private, and that people don't meet to discuss their favorite film reviewer's most recent review. But it does seem as though there is a large audience for reviews of all kinds. It's a very popular genre. I think that it still does happen at parties and with friends. If I bring up something related to the movie The Apology, for example, a friend of mine will always drunkenly comment on how learned and cultured I am, which feels like an action of separation between him and me. And because it comments on the comment itself and not on the content of the comment. So not on the movie. It's actually a separation because she's commenting on the movie.
Yeah, absolutely a great point. This is what you get, these meta. If anybody engages at all, it's sort of this meta thing. Like you said, it's a comment about a comment, which ends up being a comment about you,
right?
Not about the movie, right? And that is this sort of attack. I do think the point about people watching reviews is very apt. This is an excellent point, which shows you, one, that people are interested in this and they are hungry for this. But I would look around and see, because I think there are some excellent ones, of course, but a lot of them tend to be why this movie is great or why this movie is terrible. And you fall back into these, not all of them, by the way, I don't want to say that in any way. And it falls back into this mode of, oh, this movie was great because of this, this, and this, but it had these flaws. And often, because I've seen some of these, because people say, oh, you should see this movie, which I generally am not going to do. But I go, oh, I'll check it out. Check out some reviewers, see what some critics have thought. And then if I feel more impelled, then I'll probably watch it eventually. But then I look at a lot of these reviews and I go, oh, like, that was not very helpful. This was not very insightful. This didn't tell me very much. So on. And so, yeah. But again, these audiences are there. So it does suggest that people would like to do this, but they feel, so there's the anonymity of the digital world. So I feel slightly embarrassed to do this in public.
Yeah.
So, but I'm hungry for it, so I'll do it in private, and that will feed me. And I go, right, if these film review channels, which she's absolutely right, have millions of views, are super popular, that should mean there's millions of people out there who would like to have in-depth discussion, but they feel embarrassed, or they don't feel capable, or they don't feel like they have an environment where they're allowed to do that or invited to do that, where it's encouraged. And so, yeah, that's, to me, is really one of the frustrating elements of it, is this, inability to overcome and I think it's great to have online reviews that give you, richer and fuller, and some of these people are super knowledgeable at various aspects of film, but then to be able to bring that into your day-to-day life and interact with people and share these kinds of ideas and insights and respond yourself. I mean, that's, I think, part of it. Like, it shouldn't just be this anonymous thing that we do in the dark, right? It's like, it's interesting.
So maybe the impulse is still there in our humanity, but we're not at the Fahrenheit 451 place yet, where people just don't even want it anymore. It's just that the impulse is there, but we're embarrassed, and we just do it silently and privately. It's almost like it's a positive that the review YouTube channels are so popular. It's like the secret impulse is there.
Yeah, it suggests that people are still really interested in this and they want to do it, but somehow the general broader culture doesn't allow them. And on an absurd level, by the way, the one media I do take in is football. So we just had the Super Bowl. Yes. I love football. So I actually don't like to watch football with people because A, they're not interested in football as far as I can tell. And B, they just won't. They'll make no intelligible comments about this, with a few exceptions. But generally, people, for years I made this mistake, and I finally gave up. And my brother played football and was a football coach. My father played football, was a football coach. So very rich football household. But people actually get upset when you try to make a broader philosophical or cultural, you can see how this structure of team, what are you talking about? You just missed the tackle. I'm like, they do not want to engage. And then when the game is going on, they'll try to talk over the game. So they're both not watching the game, and then they don't want to really talk about the game. And I'm just going, this is so frustrating. This is madness to me. And I feel that that's sort of what people encounter with film culture, is this desire to participate, but then a culture that tells you that it's not for you. You don't get to participate. And to the extent you try, you're being uppity or something. Yeah.
Tina is talking about film and said, this brought up a very special memory for me. Like Wes, I too can hardly watch movies, except maybe foreign movies. It is like I get an allergic reaction of feeling manipulated. But my goodness, growing up, one of my fondest memories was being in elementary school, sitting on the floor in front of my TV with 4 older brothers watching the original Star Trek. I hung on every single word. Yes, I knew this was my world. I really think it probably still reflects a lot of my idealism. Gosh, there were a few books and movies series when I was young. I felt I just walked completely into that world. But it seems I lost this at about the age of 20 when I started studying the STEM field. Thank you for reminding me of this precious memory. And forever I'm formed intellectually by Star Trek. And I thought this was interesting because it's entertainment, but it's also a very important moment for Tina. And then also that she lost it when she started to go into the sciences. What do you think about that?
2 entirely different comments here. One is, it makes me think, and I think is that part of our problem with media is our standards are too low.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you say, I want to watch something on TV today, you'll find something to watch. If you say, I want to watch a movie today, you'll find a movie to watch. If you say, I want to find something that moves me as powerfully today as Star Trek did when I was young, that's a very, very different question. Right? That to say, not necessarily it's going to move you in the same way, because, years have passed, you're not young anymore, you've had life experiences, but to go, I want to have those sorts of powerful experiences or a piece, whatever kind of thing, but I want it to have that kind of impact on me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask that of your media, see, this is a totally different standard, and now you're in a different level of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's one of our problems is we view it as sort of this endless sequence of something else is going to come, something else is going to come. It's like streaming music. This is why streaming music, I hate the concept of streaming music, because it just says there's an infinite amount of music and it's just going to keep coming at you, which is completely different from saying I want to find a band, an artist, a song, a symphony, a choral piece, whatever, some reggae, that's going to move me, that's going to make me want to dance, that's going to make me want to sing, that's going to make me cry, that's going to make me question my whole life, right? Like that is a different standard. And I think this is when you move to the consumer standard, that it's not about a mutual engagement with the material, that this is going to come in and I'm going to engage with it. It's going to be part of my life. It's going to make something happen for me. And I'm going to transfer back. See, that it is this, we're just seen as consumers. It's kind of back to the algorithm model again. Oh, let's just feed them the lowest quality crap that they'll eat a lot of, right? Well, I'm hungry, so I guess I'll eat this crap that's in front of me. If you change, I'm reminded, I wish I could remember who it was. I think it was one of the thinkers in the Weimar Republic with Goethe, but it wasn't Goethe. Anyway, coffee was just becoming generally available in Europe. And he had gone on what he called the coffee diet, because it sort of suppresses your appetite, for 3 days, because he was saving up money so he could buy a ticket to see a concerto. And I think it was a Bach concerto that was being performed in his location. And think about how amazing that would be. Like, you've actually starved yourself for 3 days or 2 days so that you got the money to be able to hear this live music. I mean, and then he wrote, of course, rapturously about it. Bach, he's all right. It's just like that experience is totally like it's going to change your life. It's going to give you the opportunity. It may not, but at least if that's your standard or your metric, not all the time, of course, sometimes you just want to relax. But then our relationship is very different. The other part of that, so that would be part one, is to say when our standards drop so low, of course we don't find this, because we're overwhelmed with crap, and then we can't discern, and we can't be transported. And I guess now they're saying they're making shows for Amazon and stuff that are designed for you to use your phone at the same time that you watch the show. So don't make the show too complicated, because otherwise it'll distract you in your phone, right? So it has to be this kind of weird thing. Or then you're not going to have those transformative experiences, or I would say it's very much less likely. As far as the STEM goes, I think is an undeniable fact that what you study and how you study changes the shape of your mind. I call it the shape of a mind, right? And I think we can all feel that at some level, where it's like, oh, if I'm really doing, if you're having to do hardcore math, really work, it does start to change the shape of your mind. Like it's going to change your perception. Painters do not see the way the world I do. Writers, you enter this world of words, you're in this world of numbers, right? And so it may be that something either in the stress or in the way that it's interacting with your mind has sort of really quieted that more creative, imaginative, interactive space that you had more naturally when you were young. I think that's a very real possibility.
Lovisa says there's also a new phenomenon of people, after watching something, going directly to the comment section or looking up on Reddit threads to find out the sort of analysis or the meaning of the ending of a show. And it says, recently I was watching a movie with some friends and I asked them what they thought the ending meant, and one friend did not even wait 5 seconds to Google it. So we aren't trained to think about these things ourselves.
It's a great point, and this is the so people tell me, I've run into this many times where people are like, oh, well, I can look that up or I can find that out. And I'm like, yeah, you can hire somebody to learn to kiss for you, right? Like it's not the same. It really is not the same. This is why I'm always, when I talk about books, I generally ask people when I had students reading them, I said, don't read the introductions. If they're written by the author, read the introduction. But if it's written by an editor or somebody else, not that those aren't good and helpful and scholarly and all that wonderful stuff, but encounter books for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Encounter a movie for yourself. Think about it. Take some notes and then see what somebody else said. And then go, oh, God, I completely missed that. I wish I got it. Or like, oh, that person has no idea what they're talking about. Or at least they're not resonating with what I saw in a film or what I experienced, what emotionally or what came to me. Because it's because you matter. Like this is it. It's not right or wrong, right? We're so trained to be right and wrong. You can't, think for yourself and then explore. But if you haven't done that pre-thinking, then all you can do is sort of do these quick flippy switches. Oh, that's a funny comment. I like that. Or, oh, I didn't like that actor, so I don't like that person who's trying to defend them or whatever, right? It's all of these sort of pre-programmed concepts spring up in your mind. But if you actually stop and make yourself write out what you think about something, and then you go and look, or read, or this is when you go to museums and people have those things in their ears where that narrates I'm like, I just want to rip them off everybody's head. In fact, I was just at a museum where I almost had a tussle with a lady because she was like trying to give it to me, and I'm like, no, I don't want it. She's like, well, you need to take it. I'm like, no, I don't want it. She's like, you paid for it. I'm like, I know I paid for this part of my ticket. I still don't want it. I do not want a thing in my ear patting at me while I'm trying to look at shit, right? Because I'm not a very good looker anyway, and so I need to really concentrate if I'm going to see things, and words are not going to help me see pictures, right? It's going to kill me. But then if you look at a picture, examine it, feel it, get a sense of it, and then go and look at the little plaque and like, oh, this was done 12 years ago. God, it seemed like it was done 100 years ago or something. Then you can you have your own space, you have your own little ground that you can stand on. And I just always recommend that but people are so afraid of being wrong. It's weird. We don't want to seem that we're all high and intellectual and above everybody, but we also don't want to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, oh, I don't want to have a feeling about a movie that's incorrect. It's feel away, right? Like it's like, yeah, just go for it, right?
Hamid has a question that goes back to the House of the Intellect that was about doctors. It says, great lecture, Wes. Thank you for putting into words what I have always felt but couldn't articulate as a family physician. A few years ago, I decided to cut back significantly on my hours of practice to join a humanities program at a local university in Chicago, studying the great books of Western civilization. Not only did I regain my joy for reading, but also that of practicing medicine by noticing disease's bigger picture and helping some of my patients with many themes that philosophers and authors have been talking about for ages: identity, happiness, the meaning of life. And I found it interesting that among some of my colleagues, this decision was met with amusement and a subtle kind of mockery, as if humanities and philosophy somehow doesn't belong to modern medical training.
Yeah, thank you very much, and congratulations. I'm glad that was enriching for you. Sounds great. But the thing I keep, if nothing else, like the philosophy of ethics, like medical ethics, maybe I just every once in a while think contemporary medical practice has ethical implications. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe it's just me, but it's.
Yeah,
they started. I'm not even making this up. They started in the UK. They brought some universities together and started a whole new special high tech research special institution. And the new president, and it's focused on biotech, AI, machine learning, and something else, medicine, and the real core. This is going to make money, make our country great again, kind of stuff. And the president of the university said, we're really focused on these classes. This is going to be a rigorous technical institution. We're not going to have a bunch of, literally, he said, philosophy classes. And I'm like, yeah, because biomedical engineering, AI, and medicine, those things have no ethical implications at all. Why would we need it's just it's either terrifying or hilarious. I can't decide. Depends on the day. But but yeah, and I think this is right. We're told that this stuff will not help us. Like, this stuff is not for us. It's for other people. It's doesn't matter. Doesn't apply. There's no, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's tiresome. And then when people do this, like yourself, congratulations. I'm glad it worked. Often, not invariably, often they feel enriched and like, wow, this makes everything better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Eugen has a question that, or a comment that talks about his career in software, basically in software development. And so there's this thing called Scrum in software development, and it's a framework for how to create a software product, and it's a way to organize all the workers. And he says that there's this ridiculous part of Scrum that says that you can only assign a ticket a certain amount of story points that they have to be either 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, or 21. And he said that this is like a gospel within software development. And in his situation, he found that, maybe this one should have 4 points. It just makes the most sense. And everyone kind of chastised him and said, that's so stupid. We could never do 4. It has to be 1, 2, 3, or 5, or 8. And he felt like it was such a mindless environment of, these people are apparently educated, but it's this kind of sad and scary kind of adherence to these rules. So just talking about that kind of godlike, these frameworks that everyone just accepts, and if you try to challenge them at all, it's like you're ridiculous and almost heretical.
Yeah. I mean, this is a great example because, like, there is just a chance, again, that these story points might be kind of arbitrary, right? Like, like, so really, 3, 5, like, why would you not have 4? What a strange scale system, but clearly an arbitrary scale, right? So, like, and that people get super upset when you don't follow the arbitrary scale, and then you're like, hey, but what? Yes, and I think this is one of the things that I've always struggled with. I'm not good with large institutions or small institutions, for that matter, and in part because of this. But there's two sides, or at least two sides, probably a lot of sides to this. But one side is many people find comfort in this. Like, hey, I know that I have to get 6 tickets done a day that add up. I don't know, I'm just making this by nothing about Scrum, but that add up to 11 story points. And so I'm going to do 2 5s and a 1, or I'm going to do 4. And I've got a whole system where I do my tickets every day and I get my story points. And if you come in and mess around with the way they score things, basically you just ruined my world, because my world, I made it very good for me. And then the people in the higher ranks who are setting these things up are basically like, we don't know what these people are doing. We don't trust them. We don't like them. We would like them to go away. We wish we didn't have to pay them, but we do, because we need them to do things. And so we need them to fill out these things correctly. And so I'm sure many of you have had jobs where you spend as much time trying to get the forms filled out to prove that you did what you've done as you do doing what the hell you're supposed to do, right? It's just incredibly frustrating. Like, look, it took me 10 minutes to do this and 50 minutes to figure out how I fucking file the ticket that says I did it.
Right.
Like, leave me alone. Just let me do my work. And this is a friend of mine who actually worked. Can I say the company? Sure. Magic Leap. Screw them. They're losing billions. They're billions and billions into the venture capital. Have never done anything. So it's good for them. And he said, so they're in their another round of having lost billions and accomplished nothing. And he said they went into this like 6-week corporate-wide like battle to the death about how they were naming things in Jira, which is this big organizational software, I think, like Scrum, like is this big how you assign tasks to people. And they said weeks, it was weeks and weeks and weeks of the entire company fighting about how they named tasks within Jira. It's like, we're losing literally billions of dollars down the drain. Maybe, just maybe, that's not the best use of our time. But nope, he was wrong. Turned out it was absolutely the best use of their time. And they're just like, But yes, that's why it makes it hard to work in large institutions, because again, I understand from the management side, they want to track things, they want to know what's going on, and then they fall in love with that. And I understand it from the employee side, because they're like, look, this is how I'm getting measured, so this is what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
The Soviet, 5-year plans. Every 5 year they had a new plan, and everyone met the metrics every year because they just filled out the paperwork so the metrics look good. You know.
Yeah, and it seems also like a reliance on science or trying to pretend that it's scientific, something that's really not scientific. It's mostly subjective, but
Yeah.
it's this like pretending that it's scientific.
Because it's got a number, right? Put a
Yeah.
number on it. It's science, right? Like, oh, like we did a 72% increase in 3-level stories. So, woo, good for our team.
Yeah.
what? What's a 3-story? Like, why would a 72% increase of those be good? Yeah, numbers. We're so bad with numbers. My favorite one, when I was at the college, they put out a big flashy report that said that the unemployment rate for Peninsula College graduates, or no, that 90% of Peninsula College graduates, where I used to work, were employed within the first year of graduation. This was a time when the unemployment rate was 3.4%. So I wrote my president and said, "Oh, this is awesome. We've tripled the unemployment rate of our graduates against the background." He didn't think it was as funny as I thought it was funny. But I said, you might want to be a little more careful when you put these numbers. But everyone's like 90% is a good number. Very good number. 90%. Like, that's not how you should do it. But anyway, yes.
James has replaced his social media scrolling with an intentional act. He says, when I was in college, I used to keep Commonplace notebooks. I used Moleskines and Lectern 1917s. And in these notebooks, I would write down quotes of authors I was reading at the time. Going back to these notebooks and rereading them has been a great replacement to the endless scrolling I used to do when I was on Facebook. So that was just a comment about one way to one individual is trying to kind of change things for himself.
So this is one of these things where we were talking about movies and making them your own. I can't remember Mary's comment, maybe. I can't remember whose comment that was, but it's a good comment. Yeah, there used to be this thing called, it's a great word, I don't think anybody's used it in 300 years, called the Crestomathia. Mm-hmm. You can, if Scrabble word or something. But when books were super expensive, until relatively recently in the history of education, you would copy all the important passages to you, just like the gentleman's talking about, and you would create your own book, your own version. So you would have a passage with your notes on that passage, and then you would have another passage or another page with a note or a comment, and then you would skip a chapter because you're like, I don't care about whatever, and then this chapter is great, so you might capture a whole chapter. And so what you ended up with was not the book that you had copied, although people did that too, but your version of the book. And then because books were super rare, you would loan it to somebody. Like your buddy would say, "Oh, you had access to, I don't know, a work by Aristotle." Like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, yeah, here you go. But obviously not the complete one. He's like, "Oh, that's great." Then they would go through and do the same thing. And so our notion that there is this canonical book that sits there and you read it and that's the thing is even towards where we are with modern media today, because they used to be very much more interactive because they're expensive, hard to access. And so you kind of created your own version of them. Mm-hmm. And so they're very much more alive. And I recommend this to everybody. By the way, I do this. I have these big notebooks filled with quotes that I copy out. And when you go back and look at them, it is this amazing experience where you go, "Oh yeah, that is a great quote. I forgot that was in that book. Wonder why did I write that down? That seems stupid today." Right? Whatever, happens. But this way, one, the works live much more inside of you and in your mind and your life. And two, you create this new version and it keeps them alive and keeps the ideas alive. So congratulations on that. I think it's I just highly recommend that for anybody who's interested in ideas in literature and passages and poems. And I mean, sometimes you read a poem and you'll hit a great, 3 or 4 or 5 lines. It's like in Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the waves blown back, white and black. And it's just rolling series of lines at the end. It's just amazing. And so I copy that down. And so then, those lines will sort of live there. But often when you have lines that live there, then you can recall more and more. And it's like, oh, it's a touchstone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great one.
Yeah. And Patreon, I think, is a good example of that. Like, just because it's a smaller community, there is more discussion. There's more intimacy. So it's kind of a way to reflect in comments more than just listening. So
yeah.
Carter says, first, I'm not convinced that the algorithm in and of itself is bad, damaging to the house of the intellect. I see it as a floor raiser for people searching for content that resonates with them. And he uses this analogy. He says, I heard from a teacher about how information is gathered today versus in the past. Before, gathering information was like building a boat. You had to search far and wide and would take bits and pieces from all over and build what you needed. Now it's like carving a canoe from a log. Everything you could ever want and more is at your fingertips, and you need to take away to make a coherent argument. He says that analogy doesn't match up perfectly, but he says he has a great deal of confidence that he never would have found your channel or Patreon had he not been exposed to your work through the algorithm.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with algorithms. In fact, they're great. They do all kinds of wonderful things. Mm-hmm. However, there is something inherently wrong with the way algorithms are being programmed today, generally speaking, in the social media research world. And this is, we've all lived through this if you've been involved in the last 10 years, because I can remember when you would type in a search in Google and you would get a really coherent, helpful response. And now, I actually use this as an example of somebody. I typed in hotel in my city where I live here in rural France. And I said, look at this result. And the result, none of them were actual. They were all like booking sites. They were all the sites that had paid to be at the top of the search result. And so this is not helping me build my boat. Mm-hmm. This is optimized for Google to make ad revenue.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. It's when it's not optimized. So this is why Instagram has shorts. Instagram does not have shorts because people asked for shorts to be on Instagram. Instagram has shorts because they wanted to compete with TikTok. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to be shown these things, whether you want to see them or not. It's nothing to do with you. Whether it helps you build your boat or not, they don't care. Mm-hmm. And so what happened is we shifted from a model where we had these helpful, interactive, really valuable, like, wow, this is incredible, to one today where, like, again, what I was trying to find a book on Amazon, and I put in the author's name and thought, well, that'll do it. And no, it didn't. It sent up like a whole page of results, none of which had the author's name in it. I'm like, no, I recognize these are in the genre of the author I'm looking for. None of these books are by that author. Mm-hmm. And then you realize, like, yeah, Amazon is not trying to help. But 10 years ago, I used to use Amazon to look for books because the algorithm was so good about sorting books, related books, that kind of thing. And today it's not. It's just horrible. So it's not to say that it never happens and it won't happen, but yeah, it's unfortunate that it's gotten to the place where it actually inhibits. Like you say, if I want to make a boat, and it turns out that the people who sell rafts have paid for all the research results. You're going to get shit related to rafts. And you're like, I want a boat. Like, no, you want an inflatable raft. I'm like, I don't want an inflatable raft. Like, here, you need some glue. I don't need a glue. I'm making a boat, right? You're gonna end. And I'm sure we've all experienced this, where you end up with this story. Like, why am I fighting? This seems like a perfectly good search.
Yeah.
And again, just to belabor this because it is so topical, I think. I took I had to take research methodologies for my PhD, which is a great class. I mean, a horrible class, but it helps for research methodology, right? Which turns out to be very useful if you keep doing stupid stuff like I do. And I learned all the Boolean search stuff. So one of my frustrations is when I'm like, did I fuck up my search terms? And I'm like, no, it's just like, no, my Boolean string is good. I know my logic here, it should be working. And it's not responding to what I'm putting in, and I can see it. Like, I'm like, oh. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And Carter, from listening to House of the Intellect, started to think, what if I forced myself to produce 250 to 500 word review of every piece of content I consume? So this is Carter's project that he's going to start in March. It's similar to James's stopping Facebook and just looking through his old quotes from college. It's kind of like a personal challenge. So
yeah, that's a great idea. I love this idea. I'm stealing this idea because what it will make you do is like buying food and not eating it, mm-hmm. right? So So we think of watching or hearing as consuming. Like, I'm done. But I think that's not correct. I mean, this is kind of what the House Intellect is, partly about, is to say, no, you have to eat it. You have to chew it up and digest it and make it part of your cellular being. Not just go to the grocery store, put it in a bag and put it, just do nothing with it. I think that's a great way to reinforce that. Also, it's a great way to limit it, because you're going to be, if I watch this, I'm going to have to write 500 words or something, or ponder this. No, I think it's a spectacular exercise. I think I'm going to have to. That's great. I recommend everybody try that. What a great idea! I love this idea. I'm going to steal it. I'm going to try this too, and see what happens. It'll probably not slow me down that much, because I now that I think about it, I'm pretty close. But it would be a good test. You never know. You think you are, but then when you actually track it, it turns out, oh no, or sometimes yes, but no.
Yeah. And Jeremy responded to Carter and said, I was reading your comment and was thinking about two words you used a lot: content and consume. I wonder if describing online media in these ways holds a key to how we actually feel about it. The words bring to mind a ravenous individual, a consumer, who feeds on any kind of media, no matter the type or form or value or substance, content. The act of consuming content is far different from, say, listening to a lecture, watching a documentary, enjoying a comedy skit, etc. The phrase seems to homogenize all media into one thing. If I read "Thus Spake Zarathustra," am I consuming content? In a sense, I am, but it definitely doesn't feel that way to me.
Yeah, and this is what I was trying to get through, the buying groceries versus making meals and eating and digesting. And yeah, I think because there are a lot of ways. And then sometimes it is like, again, it's just great to just relax, let it go, just turn it off, and just, hey, I'm all for that. But hence football. This is what football is for, by the way. No, it's not true, because I can't help myself. But that notion of that if you just see yourself as a passive consumer, think about this. I mean, I guess almost we can wrap up here if you want, Jeremy, but I have one question I want to add in it. Is I think this is kind of one of the things all these questions, not all of them, but many of them are revolving around, like, it's passivity. It's like, you just sit there and be quiet and stare. That's your job. And if I do that, I'm doing my job. And if I do anything else, I'm getting out of bounds. I'm getting, it's sort of the fill out the multiple choice. Don't question the question. Don't ask about multiple choice. Don't vary from this. Just fill out the bubble. That's your job. You watched it. You made a funny comment to your friend. Move along. That makes us interesting and clever, I guess.
Yeah. So Sean says, hello, Wes. I love the work you're doing and have followed you since I was in high school. Maybe this isn't helpful, but I was struck by your discussion of the Columbia students who can't read in the first part of House of the Intellect. I am certainly the problem demographic, a Yale undergrad, but I can attest that teachers didn't fail to assign books. It's that they assigned far too many books. I remember being assigned The House on Mango Street and was asked to read and take a quiz within a week on top of 6 other classes like physics. The sheer volume of books was demoralizing. So he kind of just had a question about whether or not they've actually stopped assigning a lot of books.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. There seems to be evidence for both. It depends on what your background is, but what he's articulated here, and thank you for the comment, by the way. It's again, so this isn't an actual culture of learning, right? When you're in a culture of learning, you can't give people 100 calculus problems, 50 chemistry problems, 2 novels, and a writing assignment, and say it's due on Thursday. This is just silly. But this is what we do, of course. This is it's like, oh, the more the better, the more the better. Oh, there's so much more knowledge. We've got to shove more knowledge in these kids. It's like, no, this is silly. It's like, read there in France, by the way. Again, I keep using France as examples. I think they still do it, but I know they did it for decades. I'm assuming they still do it. There used to be a class, if you were studying the humanities, philosophy, literature, this kind of thing, where you would read one book for a year. The class was one book, and the class was a year long. Right. And it's like that sort of notion of going, oh, wait a second, let's just slow down. And by the time you got done reading that book, I mean, wow, you had done a significant amount of work. And that this notion of yeah, read everything. I mean, I feel like when I was in literature of course departments, I occasionally had to take, they're required to take survey classes. And I hated survey classes because it was this 2 novels a week. You know, we're going to read through 17th to 18th century British literature, and there's 50 novels, and we're going to do it in 22 weeks, and we're going to take some tests, and we're going to write a paper. And now you know British literature. And I'm like, no, what I know is that these stories are boring if you have to read them endlessly every day for, you know, that kind of nonsense. Is also not helpful. So you could be absolutely accurate here that it's a mix of too much and not enough. But both of them are the product of an environment that doesn't actually care about reading, right? That's the problem, that they don't understand personally and reflect on the value and nature of the written text and how you absorb it and how you interact with it, or art or anything else. Or math for that matter, by the way. Like more math better. It's like, but you know, there's why. Like, you know, every subject of math is more than enough to fill up many lifetimes. And you know, oh, here's some more math. Oh, here's some more math. Oh, here's some more math. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
hey, like, yeah, we do it with every subject as if more is itself a good thing.
Tina is talking about AI and says, I really appreciate your thoughts and insights, especially on the use and purposes of algorithms. I have to admit, some of my deepest and most touching conversations have come from my deep hour-long conversations with AI. AI will evolve, and what we are seeing are the first AI entities that will evolve its intelligence, and then it will evolve its own biologies around its species of intelligences. I would embrace it, as I believe it will be absolutely everywhere.
No, this is I'm not. This is one of those things like I can't remember, the author said, like, being a critic does not mean being opposed. Right? He says, you can be like oceanographers are critical of theories of the tides. They're not against tides. Like, what would it mean to be opposed to tides, right? Like, it doesn't really care if you're opposed to like gravity. I don't know about gravity. I'm critical of gravity. Right? This is not so. With AI, it looks likely to be a popular and enduring thing that we're going to be dealing with now, which is great. It's a new thing on the world, but it's not necessarily neutral in its deployment and its programming. And so this is like back to just the earlier comment about the algorithms. It's not so much the concept of AI, which I think is, you know, great and fascinating, and wow, this could be amazing, as it is about how they're programmed, who controls them, what those controls look like, and you know, all of these other ancillary rules, and you know, what is the goal and the function of them? So are they being programmed to help enrich people's lives and make everyone healthier and happier and more joyful in their experience of human existence? Answer, no, they're not. This is not how they're being programmed. Unfortunately, I wish they were, but they're not. This is not what's happening. They're being programmed to maximize either power or financial return or control or these sorts of issues for the people who have them. They're, you know, just, and this is not new in the history of the world, right? Like, if you go back, excuse me, about 90 years ago, just before World War II, people were arguing like, look, this increase in productivity that we're seeing everywhere means workers are just going to be able to work less and less and less and produce more and more and more. And this world is think of the magic world that we're going to live in when people just don't need to work because we can produce so much more with so much less input. And this is true. This is actually a possible outcome of the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't the one we chose. Right? That's what we said was like, hey, think about how much more money my factory will make me if I make those bastards work until they drop dead at the weaving looms, right?
Yeah.
That's what we came up with. And so all of these gains in productivity that we've seen over the last, or during the, by the way, again, flattened, I talked about that in the data episode, but all the gains in productivity that you've seen, a lot of that has been turned not into a reduction in work time.
Mhm.
Like, this is not what we chose to do. Chose being, societal forces, limited democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think with AI, we're in the same world. Like, no, one of the things you could do, by the way, here's a suggestion that will never happen, but is that AI is clearly using the sum of human knowledge and experience to create a new entity, intelligence, capacity, power, however you want to think about it. So everybody should get a fair cut. So there's 8 billion people in the world, and let's just say half of all the money that AI generates gets shipped directly to the people who've created, which is the humans. So if for every whatever $16 billion that AI companies make, everybody in the world gets $1.
Mhm.
Right? So if AI ends up generating $1 trillion worth of wealth, then 500 billion of that goes to everybody in the world. And, in the first world, that's not going to be that much. But in the people who are living on $1 a day, this is transformative.
Mhm.
Right? It's going to increase their yearly income by, a lot.
Yeah.
And so you could do that. And you could say, great, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. It looks like it's going to be hugely profitable and interesting. So let's just share it out with everybody. But, so the again, we go right back to what we're talking about in the House of the Intellect. So it's sort of come full circle. Maybe be boring on that one. I apologize. But the ethics of the people and the systems that are being deployed with this will determine the outcome. And those ethics are not data. They aren't numbers. They aren't anything else. They have to do with social, historical, philosophical, cultural, ethical, moral, religious, all the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. That's going to determine how this works. If for good or ill, we'll see. Yeah.
And this is our last one for this hour. Chemistry Mickey is sharing an experience he had recently where the analysis after reading a book actually helped him enjoy the book. So taking the time to go back and write about it afterward kind of changed his experience of consuming the book. So he says, I recently finished Richard Adams' Watership Down, and upon completing it, I thought, well, that was all right, but not great. And then I went back and did my post-book write-up. I was finding that I really enjoyed it in retrospect. The parts I felt were dragging were ultimately pivotal for narrative payoff and building the culture of the rabbits. Only in the analysis of the characters and events did I find the enjoyment.
Yeah. Again, thank you for that comment. Yes. And this is a great, here you go. One, this is you making the work yours. Two, there are work. Basically, I think this is where classics come from. We can all argue about which the classics are. But the classics tend to be those books that when read and thought about and reflected on, people go, wow, well, that was better than I remember it being when I read it. Right? Sometimes the classics are just like, oh, this is a great read. A lot of the classics are not that. They're books that, as you think about them, as things occur over time, as you revisit them maybe years later, and you go, "Oh my gosh, I had some experience in my life," and you go, "Oh, now I need to reread that book." Right now, I'm ready. Now I'm there. Right? That tends to be the definition of a classic, but those are works that invite and require interactivity. And one way to think about this is in the modern world, again, everybody wants to reduce entry costs, reduce friction, make things free, make low friction, make no cost, make it easy to consume, easy to see, easy to understand. But then that doesn't give you a lot to do. Because when you make things a little bit hard, you lose some audience. When you think things a little harder, you lose more audience. When you make things hard, you lose more audience or off-putting or weird or strange or something. So, but the flip side of that is, if you're invited to participate, to invest yourself in it, then the chances of getting a great payoff just increases, of course. Because if you put no effort in anything, how much value can it have?
Mm-hmm.
This is I was talking to somebody else along these lines, and I said, it's those great dinners that you make with friends that the eating of the dinner is like the 5%. So it doesn't even matter if you destroy it and burn it and the wine got spilled or something didn't cook right. Who cares? Because you just spent 3 hours having a great time. Because you've invested so much into making the meal almost can't be bad, right? And even if it is bad, even if you've totally messed it up communally, you still don't care, right? Like it's, so it's that kind of being invited to participate and spend time with great minds across time. Thank you for that comment, because I think that is right. Like this is often works get better when the more you think about them, and they become more yours.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much to all the listeners and everyone who asked questions. Go ahead.
Can I throw one more question in here? Because this is one from YouTube, and I've been trying to get some of those in, but God, we have so many great messages on Patreon. But this one came up several times, and plus there's a bit of this resonant here. And several people said that they thought that maybe video games was the new dominant culture, not film. And I thought that was an interesting thing. One, by dollar, it definitely is. Absolutely. The dollar volume just blows everything away. The video game industry is huge for that reason. And I'm interested in all media, so I've followed weirdly this kind of thing I get interested in is like how the video game, I don't play any video games, but how the industry itself has evolved and morphed. But you see the same kinds of problems, like major companies just trying to milk franchises. They don't put any value in it. They don't give the players anything new. And the classic example is that Baldur's Gate, something 3 came out like 2 years ago, a year ago, not too long ago. Huge hit. Everybody loved it. It was great. It's very popular. And the other major video game studios actually said that don't expect that from us. They shouldn't have done that. Like, this is not the kind of work, because it was too much, right? They said, well, we're not invested in that. And so you can see like loot boxes and trying to make pay to play and pay to win and all these scams that they've rolled. I mean, they're basically become scams at some level. Mm-hmm. And so not that all video games are this way, of course, but this thing that people loved and have grown up with and really invested in and can transport you to this different world and do amazing things for people, make it interactive. Again, you see these same forces at work. So in some ways it's a different media and in some ways not. But I did think that it was an interesting thing to at least reflect on is this the new dominant media, which it may be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there you go. So sorry to interrupt you, but yes, thank you for all the great questions, by the way.
Yeah, and thank you, Wes. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks, Jeremy, for helping me collate these. And to everybody, keep those questions coming. And we're going to have I think, an announcement soon. Jeremy and I were just talking about it today, to make things a little more interactive. So stay tuned for that, and thanks again.